The story begins with Yume and Mizuto becoming step-siblings after Yume's mother Uni married Mizuto's father Miniaki. Unfortunately, their parents are unaware they once dated 6 months ago, making the whole ordeal incredibly awkward. Not wanting to upset their parents, they choose to keep it a secret. Yume then proposes a game-like system to stop them from acting like ex-lovers. Anytime either of them acts like an ex, they must grovel and admit that they are the younger sibling. Yume then takes this opportunity to start looking through Mizuto's stuff, thinking it's perfectly normal siblings' behavior. And as she inches ever closer to his secret stash of naughty magazines, Mizuto realizes he's been tricked from the very start. Seeing no way out, he promptly apologizes for the way he treated her in the past. Upon hearing this, Yume becomes very flustered. Mizuto immediately calls her out, saying that's not normal sibling behavior. Then he forces her to call him Oni-chan, to which she does. Mizuto then tells her that he's just beaten her in her own game, and she might think she's smart stuff, but she's nowhere near his level. Angered by this, Yume storms out. The next day, while at their high school entrance ceremony, Mizuto is surprised to see Yume has been chosen as the class representative, revealing that she aced her entrance exam. This, in turn, made her very popular. She then uses this popularity to tell everyone that they're siblings, and she's the older one just to annoy Mizuto. But to her surprise, he was unfazed by this. Later on, two boys approach Mizuto wanting to befriend him. He acts cold towards them and excuses himself to the bathroom. While inside the stall, he overhears one of the same two boys talking about his sister and how cute she is, and that he's planning on befriending Mizuto to get to her. Back home, Yume expresses her anger towards the couple of boys that have been trying to manipulate Mizuto to get to her, stating that they're a bunch of gutless worms that don't have the courage to come directly to her. Then she asks him why he's acting so indifferent, but Mizuto simply brushed her off. Fast forward to tomorrow, while they were entering school, Mizuto gets approached yet again by the two boys. Yume then quickly changes and starts acting like she's his girlfriend. To their surprise, they quickly ask them if they're really siblings, to which Yume replies that she's sorry for having a brother complex, shocking everyone involved. Later that day, Yume's mom sends her a message informing that they will be late. Yume then passes on the news to Mizuto, to which he offers to make her something to eat. While cooking, Yume is embarrassed about her chest touching Mizuto's arm earlier that day. She then tells him to just forget about it. Mizuto struggles for a second to remember what happened, then tells her that he already forgot about it, pissing her off and making her insecure about her body. For revenge, she decides to sit by him wearing only a bath towel, tricking him into peeking at her. This almost works, but she goes too far and her towel almost falls off, until Mizuto actually helps her stay covered up. Defeated, she tries to leave but trips and they both fall on the sofa. In the heat of the moment, with Yume almost naked, they forget about the game and almost kiss, but are abruptly interrupted by their parents arriving home. Mizuto tells her to quickly hide under the sofa to avoid their parents seeing them, then they both realize situations like this are exactly why they no longer like each other. The next day, Mizuto gets approached by a random guy named Kawanami, who states that he would like to get to know him. Mizuto quickly tries to brush him off, saying that he seemed like the player type, and that he'll never let him get anywhere near Yume. He retaliates by saying that unlike the previous boys, he would really like to get to know him, but this made Mizuto even more suspicious. Kawanami then teases both of them for being way too close. Later in PE class, Yume meets Minami, a random girl who was admiring her chest, commenting how big it is for her figure, and complaining that she hasn't grown an inch in the last year. Yume comforts her by saying that she was her same size last year, and that she'll definitely keep growing. While exercising, Yume is surprised to see that Minami is so athletic, revealing that she sucks at sports. Not wanting to ruin her reputation as class rep, she pushes herself to the brink of exhaustion, scoring well in class and almost passing out. But thankfully, Mizuto caught her in the nick of time. He then tells her that she did good and she didn't have to push herself so hard. He then hands her to Minami and tells her to take her to the infirmary. Then the two girls get to know each other at the nurse's office. The next day, Minami is surprised to hear that Yume is currently sick. She then pests Mizuto for a while until Kawanami arrives and saves him. Minami then insists on visiting her dear friend. Seeing an opportunity to observe Yume and Mizuto, Kawanami tries to butt in but quickly gets shot down. Later at home, Mizuto enters Yume's room accompanied by Minami. While in her sickness haze, Yume starts blurting out random embarrassing statements such as, "Never leave me again, Mizuto," and "I was very lonely without you." Reading the situation, Minami drags Mizuto to the kitchen in hopes of making some food. After feeding her, she leaves, but just before she does, she asks Mizuto if they're really siblings. He answers that they are step-siblings. Later on, Mizuto is still taking care of Yume, who is showering him with increasingly weirder requests, such as giving her money and holding her hands while she sleeps. Eventually, the time comes to recheck her temperature. At first she tries to refuse, but Mizuto insists on doing it. To his shock, it comes back as normal, revealing that she was just toying with him this whole time. Of course, Mizuto gets very annoyed, stating that she was just wasting his whole evening. But he lets it slide just because she is still technically recovering, but not before he relentlessly teases her for being silly. 6 months previously, while they were still dating, Yume obsessively kept every item Mizuto gave her in a little box. But today, Yume finds herself with a pair of Mizuto's underwear. She then proceeds to sniff them just before realizing that having them counts as losing their game. She then becomes determined to return them, but she finds that he is awake, forcing her to wait until he goes to sleep. Then at 4 AM, she attempts to sneak into his room, only to find Mizuto doing the same thing while holding her bra. Despite their current situation, they both agree to hold a meeting to talk things out. Yume loses a game of rock, paper, scissors and had to go first. She then explains that she slipped up and reverted to her old habits of keeping everything related to him. This in turn made Mizuto blush out of happiness. She then further explains that while taking a shower, she accidentally found his underwear just as her mom came barging into the shower. Mizuto then basically said the same thing. Angered by this, Yume accuses him of doing something weird with her bras, to which Mizuto paused for a second just before denying it, making her suspicious of him. In return, Mizuto accuses her of doing something weird with his underwear, to which Yume pauses for a second just before denying it. Despite their suspicion, they both admit they broke the rules and settle on one demand that can be freely used on one thing. The next day, Yume sees Mizuto with a girl. Thinking that she is his date, she gets jealous. Back at home, Yume finds a pair of women's shoes. Thinking that Mizuto brought the girl home, she uses her one demand to force him to go food shopping, leaving the girl alone in his room. But she suddenly disappears. Mizuto demands Yume check her room, but she insists nothing has been moved or taken. Mizuto is worried as the girl was actually Minami in disguise, and she had asked him to marry him because she is obsessed with Yume, and marrying Mizuto would make Yume her sister. Kawanami, who is Minami's childhood friend, admits Minami can become intensely obsessed. As a favor, he tells Mizuto how to stop her. Mizuto later goes straight to Yume and asks her on a date, expressing it to be a demand. On the day of the date, Yume frets constantly over Mizuto's motivation, and for some reason finds herself extremely attracted to him. Via a flashback, it's shown that the date was Kawanami's idea. The date becomes tenser as Mizuto's guilt mixes with Yume's genuine awkwardness. While Mizuto is in the bathroom, Yume becomes lost. Mizuto phones her, but Yume finds that she is disappointed when he is nice to her, and does not mock her with sarcasm. She remembers a similar situation of being lost on their first date until he found her. Mizuto then finds her, and at this time he does mock her. So they descend into their usual bickering and actually enjoy themselves. Mizuto is surprised that they get on better as step-siblings than they did as lovers. After watching the date, Minami apologizes to Mizuto and promises to control herself. However, she reveals that she is not ready to give up her Yume obsession yet. Still confused over him asking for a date, Yume demands Mizuto submit to a punishment of sitting for a photo shoot, since she currently finds him very attractive, and takes hundreds of photos, just before asking him to hug her from behind and whisper in her ear. The next day, Yume asks Mizuto to help buy a gift for Uni for Mother's Day. At first he tries to refuse, but she forces him using some not safe for work tactics. After going around the mall, they settle on buying roses, which they give to Uni. This in turn made her cry tears of joy. Mizuto is reminded of his deceased mother and later prays at her shrine. Yume sees him praying and comes to support him in her own way. He then tells her that she died when he was very young and that he can't even remember her face on his own. Later on, Mizuto suggests giving their parents a night alone, as their parents are technically newlyweds. First, he suggests going to a cheap love hotel since all other options are impossible since they're underaged. But his suggestion is rejected, so Mizuto decides to stay overnight at Kawanami's, while Yume sleeps next door at Minami's. Kawanami admits to Mizuto that he and Minami were best friends once, but despite living next door they have drifted apart. Kawanami then pranks Mizuto by yelling some not safe for work stuff about Yume's chest through the thin walls, making her extremely embarrassed. Mizuto retaliates by tying up Kawanami and reading his childhood diary, which says that he wanted to grow up and be a cop so he can marry and protect Minami. This also made Minami very embarrassed. After dinner at a restaurant, Kawanami points out to Mizuto that while he and Minami argue openly about everything, Mizuto and Yume argue by trying to trick, undermine, and outdo each other, which does not seem to be healthy. Later that night, Mizuto and Yume meet on separate balconies. Mizuto comments that unless their parents have an unexpected divorce, they will be stuck as step-siblings forever, which makes them both sad and happy at the same time. A week has passed and exams are approaching. Yume, as a top-ranked student, is determined to maintain her position and beat Mizuto, so she relentlessly studies day and night. After the first exam, she is furious when she discovers Mizuto deliberately lowered his own score to let her win. Mizuto explains that he has no need for the top rank and that she has structured her life around it, so she should have it, but since she is so hung up over it, he will teach her a lesson. Yume then starts to wonder if their rivalry was ever real, reflecting on how he might have done the same thing before they even met. However, after the exams are over, Yume discovers Mizuto has finally replaced her as the top-ranked student, though he challenges her to beat him during the finals if winning is so important to her. Yume realizes now she is second, she does not feel the pressure to be perfect and actually relaxes after seeing that everyone around her treats her the same, which is what Mizuto has been trying to teach her. Realizing how much he cared about her, she rushes to find him in hopes of confessing her love again, stating that she can't live without him, but is shocked to find him talking to another girl, Isana Higashira, a severe introvert. Despite having met only recently, Mizuto considers Higashira his closest friend. Yume tries to hide her jealousy, but Mizuto picks up on it, especially after she's been acting overly nice to try and win his favor, which creeped him out. To get her to spill the beans on why she's been acting fishy, he first tricks her into becoming flustered, making her lose the game, and is then granted one demand, which he uses it to ask her what's wrong. Yume admits that she might be jealous, so he reassures her that nothing is going on between them, and then he proceeded to remind her that they are siblings now. The next day, after meeting Higashira, Mizuto blurts out that Yume is jealous of her, prompting Higashira to explain that they are just friends in her weird way by saying she wishes she was a boy. Yume is then convinced that they are just friends. The next day at school, Minami sends a letter to Higashira proclaiming that she knows her secret and to come to a certain spot after school. After arriving, she is greeted by Minami and Yume, who interrogate her over liking Mizuto. Minami then uses some very special techniques, and it is clear that yes, Higashira does have feelings for him, but she's just too inexperienced to realize it. Minami declares she and Yume will help her get a date with Mizuto, but at first she refuses as she just prefers to remain friends. Yume realizes Higashira is unsure of herself, just like she was in middle school, so she gives her a pep talk on how he could be hers. He could hold her hand when she's sick, walk her to school, and give her all the time in the world. This seemed to give her enough courage to chase after him, although Yume can't help but feel anxious about the situation. Moments later, after watching Mizuto and Higashira at school, Yume and Minami are forced to admit Mizuto is not romantically interested. And to kickstart some interest, Minami insists Higashira use her breasts to entice him. However, Mizuto fails to take an interest. Yume realizes trying to change Higashira's personality to attract Mizuto is wrong. Minami then decides to give her a makeover instead, but Mizuto barely reacts except to tease her about not eating too much fatty food as she will gain weight. Frustrated, and as a last resort, Minami tells Higashira to confess as soon as possible. Later in school, Higashira manages to give a heartfelt confession, but Mizuto lets her down gently, explaining that while he is sure they would make a good couple, his heart already belongs to someone else, although he knows she doesn't deserve it. Yume is upset Mizuto still has such strong feelings he keeps hidden, but still she can't help but cry out of happiness. Higashira returns to being Mizuto's friend, and she finds that she enjoys it more knowing there is no romantic tension. If you've enjoyed this so far, drop down below and show us some love by liking and subbing. Part 2 will come out soon enough, if not already. But in the meantime, check out our other videos on screen. I highly recommend Hiro Tries to Pick Up Girls in a Dungeon.